Yeah, Baruch Levi B here from Soul Centered and the Defiant Spirit. I didn't want to let the day go by without paying tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. It's really amazing to me that we have turned this day into, well, what we have, because I think we've taken away from the essence of this great man. My kids are out of school on MLK Day. They're watching TV. They went to the mall. I mean, they had something last week at school for MLK Day, but do we think Martin Luther King would, be happy with this as a way to pay tribute to him by them not doing something? I feel like we need to have more conversations, more education on this day. Just turn the day into that. That's great. But I don't know if something was missing. So I came downstairs and I just did a podcast on MLK and had a conversation with them about who he was. And that podcast grew out of the conversation I had because we talked about how Martin Luther King was probably an Enneagram 8, as all of you can tell behind me. I teach the Enneagram. I use it as part of my counseling. I'm bringing it to businesses now. It is tremendous because it's a blueprint for not who we are. You're not an 8. You're not a 9, the peacemaker. You're not a 8, the challenger. You're not a 1, the reformer. I don't care what your type is. It's how you react. It's where you go when you're in fear, when you're unconscious, when you're on autopilot. And we don't have to be on autopilot. We don't have to live in fear. We don't have to live unconscious. So Martin Luther King most definitely was an Enneagram 8 when he was both, I think, reacting, and we could do some of the shadows on Martin Luther King. I think it's important to be honest about who people are. You can jump over to the podcast. I put a link in the show note on, you can go over to defiantspirit.org/podcast, and you can listen to the full podcast. I think it's important that we talk about, men and women as a whole, as who they are. But in particular with this man, I want to talk about his anger. I think it's lost when we forget who he really was. And this was an angry man. We have such deep issues with anger that I think we want to try and gloss over that we want to forget that. My kids and I had an important conversation on Martin Luther King's anger as salvation to this world. Angry men and women make changes. They bring justice to what otherwise would be injustice. They speak truth to power. You don't get there by being a wallflower. You don't get there by always being, I don't know, peaceful. Now, one of MLK's greatest attributes was that he learned how to harness that anger. One of the things I talk about in this podcast is just how great this man was because he was, as an Enneagram 8, the challenger, so freaking angry, yet he didn't succumb to it. He didn't give himself over to it. He didn't use that as an excuse. In fact, he defied his nature. He defied his anger. He learned how to harness that anger and turn it into what another teacher of mine, somebody who actually walked with King hand in hand, there's a picture of him, Abraham Joshua Heschel, called righteous indignation. And I think that that's anger at its best, when we can harness it, use it for a cause, put it towards a cause to bring, can't think of a better cause, justice to injustice, to bring racial equality to a world that at the time was racially unjust. And that came because Martin Luther King had access to that 8 energy of anger. Enneagram 8s are oftentimes, we get the bad rap where the 8 holes, where the pissed off Enneagram type. And it's true. I say that as we, because I react like an Enneagram 8. I also respond like an Enneagram 8. Martin Luther King was a responsible, able to respond to Enneagram 8. Martin Luther King did not get rid of his anger. If you think he did, then you don't know the man. You didn't do the homework. You skipped over his speeches. Watch his speeches, all of them. There's a lot of angry 8 in there. And yet he harnessed it and he showed us what's possible when we don't succumb to our nature, but we defy our nature. We defy our Enneagram number. And that's the work I do. I help people defy their number and live their spirit. This was a man who did that. So jump over to the full podcast. Again, defiantspirit.org/podcast, or you can just go to defiantspirit.org. You can learn you listen to the full podcast, learn more about the man, learn more about the Enneagram 8. And at its best, when we, like we should all do, defy our number and we live our essence, we live our spirit, which is so much more than a number. And this man was so much more than a number, even though he embodied the best of what the Enneagram 8 has to offer when we harness our anger and use it and are not used by it. So I will see you in the next pod or video, and you can listen to the podcast. I would love to hear from you, love to hear your thoughts, and any reflections you have about this great man or any important issue. Until then, defy your number, live your spirit. We'll see you in the next video.